Hey, I'm Doug, and welcome to the second video in the Celestion SpeakerMix Pro plugin video series. My original plan for this video was to deconstruct some of the strategies that I used for the demos in the first video, but I learned so much in the process of making the demos. In this video, we're going to focus on those. But before we do so, we're going to hear once again from Ken Weller and Joe Elsom from Celestion. You guys have done a great job of making the transition of making traditional speakers to IRs and now a plugin. Can you just give us an overview of what the plugin actually enables you to do?
So the plugin at its core is a 6-channel mixer of speaker responses. So you can load any combination of speakers, cabs, and microphones onto any of the 6 channels, mix them together with room sends, different room responses, selection of mics, or load your own rooms. And then there's extended functionality like the dynamic responses and also the Z-curve coupling or Z-curve coupling, which is the electrical coupling between the cabinet speakers and the amplifier output stage.
Before we talk about how I was using the plugin, I figured it would probably be a good idea for you to hear kind of a deconstructed and reconstructed version of the mix, both for the melody guitar, so you can hear it on its own and then the other layers added, and for the rhythm guitars as well. So for all the rhythm tracks, I was using that 1969 Plexi, and the melody, I was using a JVM 410JS, kindly on loan from Joe Satriani. All right, we're going to start off looking at what I refer to as Angus 1 and Angus 2. Those are basically, if you take a look at the first 2 channel strips there, those are the DSRs that I pulled up for the SG track. Now, before we talk a little bit more about that, I want to talk about how you choose the speaker that you're going to use. So you simply click on this speaker, and it brings up this menu here. Top row, you select the speaker you want. Next row, you select the cabinet. And then you select the microphone, and in the upper right-hand corner, you close out. Okay, now there are a bunch of things happening in this interface here, so let's take a closer look at some of the important things. All right, kind of in the top center area, you're going to see basically the microphone placement slider. And other than the speaker type and the microphone, and I guess the cabinet as well, this is probably the place where you're either going to go right or you're going to go wrong. And this is a huge, huge deal of just kind of finding what you're looking for the guitar, amp, speaker, cabinet, and microphone that you're going to be using. And more often than not, you're going to find you're going to be using the same stuff over and over. So finding that sweet spot is going to be important. That's not to say not to experiment, but ultimately you're going to probably find the spot that works best. All right, moving over to the left-hand side there, you're going to see the Z-curve, or as the British and Australians would say, Z-curve. And basically, as it goes from low to high, it is replicating the interaction between a clean amplifier and, quote-unquote, the speaker system. That is to say, the speaker, cabinet, and microphone. And then as you turn it up, it imitates basically the relationship of a distorted amplifier. And if you think about a clean amplifier and a distorted amplifier, how different they are sonically speaking. The kind of one of the things about distortion, it creates all these other harmonics, odd order, even order, but there's a lot of very different information sonically speaking when you compare a clean amp to a dirty amp. So the Z curve or the Z curve, lower settings, clean amp. Upper settings, dirty amp, and you just want to experiment finding out what works best for, again, what it is that you're going for. All right, down below there is the input fader. Now that is arguably just about as important as the other 2 things we just talked about. First of all, what this is controlling, if you think about a twin reverb, which is actually a pretty darn loud amplifier, doesn't distort until you start to turn it up a bunch. And at that point, it's really loud. So if you think about plugging a twin reverb into an 8-inch speaker and turning up, you begin to realize what this control does is this allows you to choose how hard you want to drive the speaker. All right, that's pretty straightforward. Moving over to the right there, you have a pair of meters. One would reasonably think that they correspond with the two master faders down below. They do not. Those basically sum the 6 channel strips or faders, if you will, for each of the DSRs that you potentially will run, and they meter that. And I would strongly suggest not letting those meters get into the red. I was not able to hear any audible distortion inside the plugin with a couple of exceptions, and this is where you can get yourself into trouble. If you start letting that out, the kind of the master faders there, the lower right, get up in level, and you're not watching your meters, it's not that I noticed that there was distortion happening inside the plugin. It starts to distort your stereo bus inside your DAW, and that's a real problem. So be conscious of that, watch your levels, and sometimes other than the main, that input level there, a little bit less is more, and you're just adjusting the volume level for these different things. So just watch out for peaking these meters. All right, let's head back over to Angus. All right, now that we know what some of these settings are, you're going to notice I don't have the Z curve super hot. Plexi Marshalls aren't particularly hot amplifiers. I probably have it a little bit lower than arguably I quote unquote should, but I liked the way it sounded. Down below, the same thing with the input there. I wanted to back that off a little bit. Basically, this greenback is a 25 watt speaker. You can get that thing to overdrive in some really great ways when you want it, but when you're seeking some clarity, you don't want to hit it too hot. So that's why I've got it set where I've got it. All right, as I toggle between the first channel strip and the second one, I want you to watch the mic placement slider there, and you're going to see that I'm basically blending in these two mic placements. Take a look at the fader on channel strip 1 and channel strip 2, and you're going to see they're the same. So literally, they're kind of equally the same volume, but the different mic placements allow me to add some, if you will, depth of field. Now, basically, those are both panned hard left for Angus, and Malcolm, I basically replicated everything inside there, but panned it hard right. So moving over to Mr. Satriani, we have now loaded the G12T75. And there are a couple of key differences about this particular setup here. As I toggle back over to Angus here, take a look at where the Z curve was, and take a look where I've got the Z curve for Satch. Much hotter because it's a much higher gain amplifier. Ditto on how I'm driving the speaker there with the input level. I'm purposely wanting to hit the G12T75 a little bit harder than the greenbacks. And there was one other big thing that happened on this particular expedition. And this is, again, why I wanted to kind of go a little bit deeper on these particular tracks. First of all, you know, right behind me, let's see if there we go, is a 2 notes Torpedo Captor X. And that's what I used to basically capture the sound of both of the amplifiers. I didn't use any of the processing in there other than the reactive load to capture the essence of those amps and bring that into Pro Tools. Now, the deal is that once I had this inside Pro Tools, the Satriani one took a little tiny bit of massaging. And I moved the mics around. I should say, I started off with a different mic. I started with off with a 57, and I was moving it around, and I couldn't quite find what I was looking for. So, and you can see that I'm on the second channel strip there. And I ended up just trying a 421. And I think on that first channel strip, I also dialed up a 421, but in a different placement on the speaker. And where I ended up with, kind of once I got that 421 in that right place, it was just like the heavens opened and the guitar just sat perfectly. It responded in the bottom end and kind of in the middle neck and at the top of the neck exactly the way I wanted to. Now, I'm mentioning this not because you've probably not heard of a 420 because most of us have. But the deal is that's not necessarily my favorite guitar mic. Great for toms, great for miking the port on a bass amp, especially in combination with an SM57 on the edge of the dust cap. But for guitar, it's just not necessarily my favorite sound. But I was just like, I don't know, let me try it. And when I did, it was literally kind of like, oh, okay. And then I think I just moved the mic just a little tiny bit. And that's why I kind of moved it over to a second channel strip there, just to kind of go, oh, okay, if I want to go back and forth between the two, I can. By the way, in the upper part of the interface there, and we talked about that in the last video, there is an A/B function where you can toggle between basically two versions of the same instance of the plugin. And in this particular instance, I just kind of wanted to have them side by side. I could mute and unmute them freely, kind of just with a click of a mouse. But there will be times where, say, for example, you wanted to A/B two completely different speakers and different microphones, then that is probably easier just to use the A/B function. In any case, once I had that second channel strip up and got the mic placement, it was just like, wow, it just fit perfectly in the track. And I could not have been happier with the way it sounded. And the thing that I want to really point out is that if you think about all the stuff that I was able to control and manipulate compared to your traditional IR, game changer. Moving on. There are a bunch of things that you can do inside SpeakerMix Pro that you couldn't do in the analog world. Ken, would you care to kind of illuminate some of those things?
Yeah, so obviously we've taken account of the phase potential issues. So all the phase is compensated for. So you can put your microphones anywhere you like and know you're not going to have any phase problems. But you can do what we call impossible stuff, impossible mixes, where you could have 3 microphones all in exactly the same position in front of a 4x12 with greenbacks in it, mixed with the rear microphone from a 1x12 with a blue in it, in a way that you simply couldn't do it in the real world.
So as Ken pointed out, one of the great things about the plugin, of many, is that you never have to worry about phase alignment. That's a big deal when you're switching microphones and cabinets and moving the position of the microphone around. Huge. All right, one of the other things that I really love about this is it's kind of a sonic playground where I will do a number of things that I normally do, as well as try some things that I wouldn't normally do. All right, the sound you just heard there was my Helix coming out in stereo, obviously not using any cabinet modeling in my Helix rack there. On the left-hand side, you're hearing a 212 open back cabinet, virtually loaded with a Celestion Blue and virtually mic'd up with an SM57. On the right side, another 212 open back cabinet, loaded with greenbacks. Again, that classic combination of a blue and a greenback. You can't go wrong with that. And this one was mic'd up with a 121. Now, normally, I would mic both speakers with a combination of a 57 and a 121. But in this instance, I don't know, let me try something new. Now, before I go for the not so big reveal, but for me, it was kind of a big deal on what I did on the lead sound. I did something I have never done before. And in the analog world, I probably wouldn't do under most circumstances. On the left side, I'm using a 412 cabinet with greenbacks, miking that up with a 57. But on the right side, I'm using a 212 open back cabinet, also with greenbacks, but mic'd up with a 121. I would normally never put a 412 on one side and a 212 open back on the other, simply because they're so disparate. I like having different things happen on opposite sides of the stereo field, but that's something I wouldn't normally do. As you take a look at the mic placement on the mic position slider there, you notice that I've gone for a darker placement on the 412 cabinet than I did on the 212 open back. So that's providing a little bit of compensation. And overall, I was very happy with what I got. By the way, take a look. I'm actually using, the Z curve is actually fairly high because I was going for a relatively distorted tone. I love the sustain and the feel. And speaking of the feel, that was really the thing that impressed me the most. is sometimes when you're playing in the box, you sometimes have to hit the strings harder to get more gain because you're pushing the front end of the amp virtually. With a traditional amplifier, it's a very funny thing, is sometimes you can actually relax a bit, hit the string a little bit softer, and you actually get more gain and more bloom. It's totally counterintuitive, but it's just one of the things about a great tube amp that sometimes you just hit it a little bit softer and you get even more out of the amplifier. And what it's actually doing is giving the amp the opportunity to add some bloom. And as I was playing this solo that you're about to hear, I was noticing, I'm like, wow, the notes are blooming, which is, first of all, I love my Helix, but it is a digital environment. The dynamic response of what was happening in the DSRs was something that I could absolutely feel. It was something that I could hear. And most importantly, it allowed me to approach playing my Helix the same way I would approach playing a traditional amplifier. And that is a big deal in my world. All right. Want to thank you so much for checking out this video. This has been a long video, so hopefully this has been a big help to you. If you got any questions or comments, please leave them down below. If by chance you have not subscribed to the channel and would like to, I would like to invite you to do so. Please ring the bell and also hit that like button. That would be awesome. In the meantime, look forward to seeing you next week for the third video in this series. Thanks again for watching. Cheers.